Welcome to the Top Order podcast. If you're looking at this on YouTube, it's a much more fireside chat feel to today's episode. Just Stu and I in the Rack and Opinion bar here in Auckland as we preview the Australian series up against the West Indies in the West Indies. No chance for Australia to lick their wounds after that horrible loss to South Africa in the World Test Championship final. We're off to the Caribbean and Test cricket on the agenda again.
Absolutely, yeah. Look, 10 days ago, I think around that time, South Africa won the World Test Championship, and look, we're straight into the next cycle. Bangladesh is already playing Sri Lanka. They've already played that game, a draw. England's hosting India. Yeah, we're straight into it. And I guess to give the listeners a bit of a look behind the scenes again, we talked last week about England-India, and we went in our Slack channel, what should we do about recording? It's Sunday night. We normally record on a Sunday night. We're like, oh, well, shall we record this or shall we wait until India-England is finished before we record? And, we said, what about Australia, West Indies? And straight away you came back, I have thoughts. So, and then we're sitting here in this fireside chat. My initial thought was, okay, Baldy needs a bit of a therapy session here. I will be here for my friend. I'm here to chat. Is that what we're doing here?
Not quite. There are lots of questions to ask and answer about this Australian cricket team going forward, and I think our first glimpse of what might be the future of this Australian team post-World Test Championship final, we'll get to see glimpses of that in the Caribbean against the West Indies. Before we jump into the sort of the sky is falling stuff, I just want to reassure the listeners and the viewers that we're not on the couch. We don't have Daryl Cullinan's couch in the studio at this stage, but it's never far away from my life, so we're okay for now, and let's plow on with your bit of an explainer on the format of this Test series against the West Indies to kick off the next World Test Championship cycle for these two sides.
Yeah, so look, it won't be a long explainer really. It's more just that it's a 3-test series, which I think is the first one that the West Indies have hosted since maybe 2022 against England. It's been a while since they've had a 3-test series. Coming from New Zealand, I can certainly sympathise with that. We don't have too many of them. The first one starts on June the 25th, which actually over here in New Zealand is about 2 o'clock in the morning on the 26th. First test is in Bridgetown. Second test about a week later on the 3rd of July in St George's. And then the 12th of July is a day-night test, third test in Kingstown. So, yeah, very, very sort of quick turnaround of, not many days between each test, and then 5 T20s to kind of end the series.
Interesting in the format that Australia will play their first day-night test overseas. They've played all their tests, the day-night tests, at home so far, and since the advent of day-night test matches. So it'll be interesting to see where we go with that. Some interesting selections, some interesting Sean Abbott chat in the media today around will he get a game for the day-night test, and there's lots to unpack about both the batting lineup and the bowling lineup, I think, for Australia. Before we do that, do we want to cover the West Indies team news first? Because I think there's a fair chance that we're going to dive pretty deep on this Australian team. So let's make sure we get some good West Indian coverage in before we dive into the Aussie stuff.
Well, look, I'm not the best person. I will be happy to admit I'm not the best person to deep dive into West Indian cricket. They're a side that we sort of haven't seen a huge amount of over here in New Zealand. We're going to get to see them down here at the end of the year, so I'm excited for that. 3 tests against the West Indies. It was a 2-test series. It's turning into a 3-test series. So, yeah, kind of excited to, I guess, from my point of view, watching this series, I'll certainly have an eye towards looking to that. Who are some of the players that are coming? And, I went back and looked, what's the West Indies record at home? Because sometimes, we saw them go to England and, lose that series. I thought, okay, what are the home sort of situations been like for them? And I think the formula in the West Indies over the past little while has basically been either very low scores or you put a big score on in the first innings and then it seems like, even though it is seamers that were taking most of the wickets, certainly from the West Indies point of view, they played Bangladesh in one of their last series, and Taijul Islam got a 5-for in the second innings and helped Bangladesh to a win. But really the formula has been the way you win is you put a big score on, and then by the end of the second innings scores have been barely getting to 200 in the last few tests.
So it's a race to 20 wickets there from having put a big score on in the first innings. I think low scoring probably brings the teams closer together a little bit in terms of, the way the series might play out. I think that plays into the West Indies' hands a little bit. I think Australia on a better batting track will still have bowling good enough to take 20 wickets in each test match. But on a wicket where the bowlers have a chance to really dominate the bat, not as badly as happened. Oh, sorry, maybe to the same extent that it happened in Lords, but we saw an opportunity for ball to dominate bat in that test match, and Australia really got found out in the top of the order. And the bowling, while it was good enough in the first innings, by the time the track flattened out, South Africa had enough runs on the board and enough guys who were set to, chase down a healthy, fourth innings chase at Lords, 280 plus.
Absolutely, and the West Indies, if we're thinking about the sides, when I look at that side, the West Indies bowling attack is certainly their strength in terms of Seales, Alzarri Joseph, Shamar Joseph, who I'm sure has very fond memories of the last time he played against Australia. There's no Kemar Roach this time. It certainly looks like, and there's been a bit of a batting shake-up as well. It looks like the West Indies have, I'll read a quote here from Daren Sammy, actually, because I found this super interesting. He said, "We analysed what the top teams in the world are doing and what's needed to bridge the gap." And essentially, he was talking in general, but he was also then mentioned Brandon King and said Brandon King's inclusion fits a role that we have identified that needs special focus. So it's sort of like that they are really going, okay, well, we've got a plan here, okay, and we're bringing in players that we've seen. So Brandon King's come in, Shai Hope's come in, Alick Athanaze, Joshua Silva, a couple of the outs. There's as I said, Kemar Roach is out as well. I mean, he's been a tremendous bowler for the West Indies for a long time, and it seemed like he was available. Seemed like, at least in the past couple of series that he's played for the West Indies, he's done a decent job. It feels, slightly harsh, but I guess he's 36. They've decided, it is time. It's the new cycle, and we want to put some steps in place to sort of move forward and build a squad that we can move forward with. So
that's really exciting for the West Indies, isn't it, though? Because those are proactive moves rather than reactive moves based on player availability, right? I think for a long time, the West Indies board, the West Indies selectors, the West Indies team structure has been reactive to who's available rather than saying, these are the people we need to drive our test cricket forward. I really like the inclusion of Shai Hope. I really, really like the inclusion of Brandon King, because what it tells me is that the West Indies are going to play attacking cricket and they're prepared to take Australia on with their batters. And I think that sets up a really juicy encounter against those Australian bowlers, particularly if there isn't a lot of bounce in the wicket. If those guys can play on the front foot and play without real fear, if you like, of, the Australian bowlers putting one into the top half of their bat and, having edges fly to the slip cord. And I think that sets the West Indies up for the best possible opportunity to score heavy against that Australian side, because I think if the West Indies decided that they were going to, bat long periods of time and wear Australia down, that plays into the hands of the Australian bowlers to a certain extent. So I really like the strategy that the West Indies are going with here.
Yeah, I think it's more just, for me, I love that it seems like there's a plan. It seems like there's a plan in place, which we might get to shortly about Australia and whether that plan is actually in place for them. Because, the West Indies, look, they, of course, you mentioned it before on who's available and who's made themselves available. That's still, we've just seen players like Puran just retire from international cricket and things. So, look, that's going to be an issue, it seems, for the West Indies for a while. But there are some new names in there. Kevlon Anderson is one that I saw and went, I just can't, I'm not going to pretend I know anything about him. There are new names in that side that I don't know anything about. So I'm kind of excited to see which ones of those get an opportunity. And which ones of these returning players can actually kind of, Shai Hope, we've seen how good a player he is. You just
terrific one-day player, unbelievable one-day player. Yeah. But we want to see them convert that to, as we have done for 25 years with this West Indian side, right? We want to see all of this talent convert into consistent performances. And I think, De Silva's a little bit unlucky. I think Alick Athanaze is also a lot unlucky not to hold his place in the test side, because as far as talent is concerned, those guys really have a lot of talent. And I thought actually Josh De Silva had a lot of stick-to-itiveness about his game. He was one of the guys where you felt that when the going got tough, he was the one that was prepared, or he was one of the ones who was prepared to sort of dig in and really guts it out for the West Indies and not roll over when, other opposition teams were on top. So I think that those two guys in particular were probably a bit unlucky. But if it brings about consistency in selection, it brings about consistency in performance, then you've got to admire Daren Sammy's approach to, okay, this is the way forward for us as a group of nations.
As I said before, I'm not the expert on the West Indies, so I think now we've done enough posturing. Now it's time to talk about Australia, because, look, I think when we reviewed that World Test Championship final, I know you were down, and you know a little bit. We talked beforehand, and you looked directly into the camera and said Australia's going to win this, and Australia's going to win easily, and it didn't eventuate that way. I will say, I think there's certainly an alternate reality where Steve Smith takes that catch in the second innings, Bavuma's out, it's 76 for 3. The South Africa kind of crumble around Aiden Markram. He holes out at the end of the innings, or gets stranded at the end there. We don't see Keshav Maharaj's tears. We don't see all the Temba Bavuma songs going on social media. We don't see his black glasses 3 days after the World Test Championship final. And instead we see, Travis Head hangover pictures and, Pat Cummins Golden Boy headlines going through this situation. I really think it's not doom and gloom for Australia. But then, there has been some fallout. And one of those is Marnus Labuschagne, the first kind of domino to go, probably if they win that test, Marnus Labuschagne maybe is still available and in this lineup for the first test against the West Indies. Now we don't see him.
I think if he'd scored big runs at the top of the order, we would see him. I don't think winning or losing that game of cricket impacted Marnus's future. I think it's whether or not he made a contribution and whether or not at the top of the order he formed the partnership with Usman Khawaja that looked like it could dominate bowling attacks. I think the takeaway for Australia is whoever in the partnership was responsible, and let's be fair, it's probably 60-40 Khawaja's not being dominant enough and looking to score enough in his innings that put pressure on Marnus and vice versa. I think the Australian selectors went, look, if we try and hang in against the best attacks in the world, and let's face it, Australia should be planning for not just the West Indies, but how are we going to face the best attacks in world cricket? That partnership didn't look like it was constructed with the players and with the attitudes and with the mentality to look to either dominate the bowling through attacking stroke play, which we've been treated to for 10 or 15 years with David Warner and with Matt Hayden before that. It also didn't look like they were prepared to or had the ability to, in that particular test match, take the singles, work the ball into the gaps,
That's something Warner was actually, to give him his credit, was brilliant at.
And it didn't take the pressure off each other in a way that allowed Australia to get going in the game. And when we did lose a wicket, when Khawaja didn't move his feet, fenced off, when Marnus Labuschagne, fenced off 6-7 stump outside, the scorers not moving forward. And so Australia are under pressure at that point. Cameron Green comes in, goes out quickly. Then all of a sudden it's 20 for 2 instead of 60 for 2. And Australia are really struggling to get themselves into the first hour of the test match. And we know, look, the first hour of batting at Lords on day one is always difficult. There's no two ways about that. We're not saying that was a flat wicket on day one. It was difficult to bat on for a good day and a half, almost 2 days of that test match, right? 14 wickets fell on day one. I think 14 wickets fell on day 2. So they're not solely to blame for Australia's batting woes. But I think what we have learned from that Lord's test is that Australian top 3 is not showing us enough for us to say, as cricket fans, as pundits, whatever, that's the top 3 that we're assured of going forward. So there are lots of questions for Australia to answer in terms of what the construction of their top 3 is going forward. And I think even that Marnus was dropped, I think all 3 of those Australian batters from Lords will have some kind of pressure on them going into the West Indies series. Usman Khawaja's 232 magnificent innings in Sri Lanka notwithstanding, his form's been lean over the last 18 months or so. Marnus's form was so lean that has been dropped. Cameron Green's form domestically has been very good, but as you pointed out in the preview of the South Africa, Australia World Test Championship final, the large majority of that form that came about in the English County Championship was batting at number 5 and number 6, not batting at number 3. And I think you have a look at the way that he was dismissed early on. I mean, like, quite frankly, Ian Chappell's quote keeps coming back to me. You can't assess Cameron Green's form as being good or bad because he didn't last long enough to know whether he's in form or not. He nicked off third ball in the first innings and third ball in the first innings, second ball in the second innings. It's very difficult to know whether or not he's in form and what you can read into that. But what it did show me is that the way that he presented his bat and the way that he played at the ball with very, very hard hands early in his innings is the antithesis of the Kane Williamson kind of mentality, right? Playing the ball very, very late, playing it under your eyes, making sure that it doesn't go to slip if it gets an edge, those kinds of things that Kane Williamson has mastered. And to be fair, Marnus Labuschagne does a pretty good job of. Most of the time he's playing the ball under his eyes when the ball's on the stumps. We are yet to see whether or not Cameron Green is a test match number 3. And I think the big question for Australia is, of the senior players, who's prepared to step up and bat at number 3 for Australia while we bring in another player into the fold, right? We're going to talk about who can come in for Australia potentially in the West Indies series and going forward into the Ashes. But actually, where are our senior players stepping up as they have done in the past and saying, you know what, I'm going to take the onus of being a number 3 for Australia. I'm going to step up and bring the new guy in at number 5, number 6. And that would suit Cameron Green, I think, down to the ground if he could come in and bat at 4 or bat at 5 in that order. But I don't see Travis Head going up to number 3 or opening. We've already seen that that's not his go. I think Smith is more comfortable at 4. I don't think Beau Webster is at the moment in his career a test number 3. And for me, he's done enough in that Australian side to lock himself in at number 6 going forward, at least for this West Indies series.
Surely.
And I don't know how do you feel about that, Stu, from Beau Webster's perspective? I want to get onto the top 3 certainly, but getting Beau Webster out of the way, he's averaging, I think, 35 to 40 now in Test cricket. Prior to the World Test Championship final, he was averaging 50 in small sample size. Reasonable with the ball, but without being electric. What's your thoughts on how we should be thinking about Beau Webster and his role in that Australian team?
I mean, I think you said it before. I think he's done enough so far to retain his spot. I did worry. I certainly think if I was the West Indies bowlers and had just watched that World Test Championship final, I'd be looking at his front pad and, off stump and thinking that's exactly where I'm going to target. Even a couple of those ones where he was not dismissed or, reviews that weren't taken. And then, the way he did get out in the end. Yeah, that ball feels like you bowl sort of fifth stump line, jagging back in towards off stump, and there's a bit of a weakness there. I mean, again, I haven't seen enough of him apart from his test match innings to know whether that is a long-term weakness or whether that is just something that happened in that Lord's Test and suddenly you're going, okay, well. But either way, I think that's exactly what I'd be trying to do over in the West Indies if I was Shamar Joseph and Alzarri Joseph and those guys. But I think, as you say, he's been great in the field. He's been useful enough with the ball. He's been able to score a couple of really important innings for Australia. Obviously, he was given a life by those reviews in the World Test Championship final, but was still able to put together a 70 that proved we thought at the time was going to be a very vital innings. So, yeah, I think he's done enough. I don't think there's any real question, but probably if you suddenly had this group of other batters putting pressure on, then when Cameron Green is fit to bowl, then it starts to become a question again, because whether they're, when it gets to that point, I would say probably Green is a better bowler, or looks to be, at least if he's able to stay fit, probably offers more. So do you need both of them in the side? Is Beau Webster putting in enough runs? But I think that's probably a question for down the line.
I think it's a question for down the line. It's certainly not going to be answered. I don't think it's going to become a crisis point in this West Indies series. We might, if we have batters round into form and our top 3 starts to get sorted out, we might, and we think that Cameron Green's not in their top 3, then we might start having questions about Cameron Green or Beau Webster at number 6 going into the Ashes. But I think with Smith's injury, with Marnus being dropped, there's enough gaps in that Australian batting order that there's room enough for both of them at the moment. And I think we're probably likely to land on that becoming a bit more of a problem more towards the Ashes. But it's certainly an interesting one to monitor going forward, because as far as depth is concerned, I think they're both fantastic players. I don't think there's any doubt that Green is probably a more talented cricketer, but Webster has quite literally put the runs on the board for Australia when he's got the opportunity. As you say, he's played innings of substance in just about every test match that he's played. He's looked serviceable with the ball. I don't think he's the kind of guy who's going to get you a test match 6 for, in the first innings and rip the heart out of the opposition, particularly that England attackers Cameron Green might be able to do. And I think it really depends on
that. Kyle Mayer's got a 5 for in one of the games I was looking at. So look, over in the West Indies,
he's not a bad bowler though. Kyle Mayer,
swings it.
He actually is an underrated cricketer. I'd really like to see him in that West Indies side going forward. But just focusing on that Cameron Green thing, I think we just need to think about, like, he's had a couple of back injuries. Yeah. He's had a few injuries now where he's had to come back and get ready for bowling again. Let's not put too much pressure on the kid. Let's make sure that he's fit and healthy first and then worry about, okay, is he going to displace Beau Webster in that all-rounder spot?
Yeah. I mean, okay, so let's sort of break down this Australian lineup. We've talked about, the top 3. It looks like for this test, at least the way George Bailey is talking, that we're going to see Konstas, Khawaja, either Green or Inglis, or those two, but in some order, 3 or 4. Mm-hmm. Personally, if I would go Inglis 3, Green 4, because I do think that I agree with you that Green is probably better suited to 4. Looked brilliant for Australia over here in New Zealand at 4. And then you're going to have Travis Head and Beau Webster probably as your top 6. But what is going on? Because honestly, it feels like they're just picking names out of a hat at some point over the past few series. Even in this World Test Championship, this one-off game. Do you think that the inclusion of Konstas, the inclusion of Inglis now, and Bailey's comments really around we want to give these guys an opportunity, do you feel that they're going to be a bit more settled now? Do you think we're going to get to the point where no, you're shaking your head?
No, I mean, we've had so many opening batters since David Warner retired that I can't even remember all of their names. In fact, I'm not sure that I didn't have a go at opening the batting for Australia after Warner retired. In fact, I think we've had almost as many opening batters as we've had spinners since Warne. And I'm not saying we've got a Beau Casson situation over here in the West Indies. I hope we don't. But the Sam Konstas selection, let me actually say 2 things. Both selections, I think, for very different reasons, are actually good selections. I think from an opening batting position, we need a guy for the future. And I think Sam Konstas, if you have a look at all the Australian batters in the Sheffield Shield at the moment, and you think about what is the future for opening the batting in Australia for the next 10 years, I think Sam Konstas is one of those opening batters at the moment. And I'm not looking at what he's actually able to produce now. I'm thinking about the batter that he could be 2, 3, 4 seasons from now at 20. How old is he now? 19.
19 now.
So 2, 3, 4 seasons from now, he's still only going to be 23, which would be younger than anyone on this list of guys that I had written down that we talked about pre-show in terms of, who's producing runs in the Sheffield Shield, except for Oliver Davies. And he's now 23 and he's been around the Big Bash scene for a couple of years. So I think he is a good selection if we want to produce an Australian opening batter for the future. And I think he's good in a couple of different ways. 1, I think he's got the most talent of anyone that we're talking about. 2, I think he provides a good foil for those other top order players in that he will look to take on the opposition. Not all the time, because we've seen in Shield cricket, actually he can be a bit more circumspect and he can not grind out innings, but he's not going at the Jasprit Bumrah 60 off 20 pace, right? But he can take a game away from the opposition if everything falls into place. I think he's going to learn very, very quickly in Test cricket that you can't ramp everybody on the first game of the Test match consistently and get away with it. You're going to nick off. But from a talent perspective, I think he's the right selection for that particular position. The Josh Inglis selection is interesting and I think a good selection for different reasons. Smith is injured. Smith's going to go out. He's going to recover from his dislocated finger. He's going to come back.
Yeah, so it sounds like maybe second or third test he could be available.
So you're looking at short term, who's our spare batter, who's the guy most likely to step into a position anywhere in the order, fill a job and do really well. I think Josh Inglis is the best guy in the country, positioned to do that job for Australia in that position. He's already shown that he can score 100 in Test cricket.
Yeah,
I think he's a terrific spare batter for Australia. He's fantastic depth cover. And if you're looking for a guy who can come in for 1 or 2 games and do a job for you, I think Josh Inglis is perfectly positioned to be able to do that for Australia. So I think that's a very, very good selection from George Bailey and the selectors for that particular circumstance.
You don't think he's playing for long-term success now? I mean, he comes in, gets his opportunity. Let's say he does well. Could he get himself into number 3 and then Smith goes to 4, Travis Head at 5, and then, Cameron Green and Webster are fighting it out for that spot at 6?
That's the potential upside, I think. That's the potential upside that we're looking at. I think Australian selectors would be looking at all sorts of different possible permutations for that opening spot because, as we mentioned earlier on in the show, Usman Khawaja's form over the last 18 months, the 232 in Sri Lanka notwithstanding, hasn't been brilliant. And
he's 37. I mean, is he 37? Something like that.
He is still Australia's senior opening batter. We've written this guy off multiple times throughout his career, each time he's come back, and actually he's come back better every time he's come back into that Australian side. And when he came back into this last iteration at the top of the order, we were in pretty dire straits and we really needed someone to step up. And he averaged 50 or 60 in the first 2 years that he was back in that opening spot. And has scored, I think he scored more runs past 35 than most of the, established Test superstars over the last 35 or 40 years.
Okay.
So from that perspective, he's done really well. He's in a lean patch. I am looking forward to either pre or post Ashes, who are our opening options to go into that spot. And I think, if you look at potentially thinking outside the box, which Australian selectors are likely to do, right? We've picked McSweeney, not an opener. We've picked Sam Konstas, 19-year-old, can open the batting, but, is a young, unfinished product, raw talent type of fella. I think Australia will be looking at not only the established list of, top run scorers in the Sheffield Shield, and we can go through a couple of the runners and riders in that respect, but they'll also be looking at outside the box options for opening the batting or batting in the top 3 against for Australia. And I think Josh Inglis is firmly in their conversation there. I think, don't write off guys like Mitchell Marsh being able to come in and see ball, hit ball at the top of the order and provide a different look and feel. I mean, you only have to look at the West Indies. They've decided they're going to go Shai Hope and Brandon King, established white ball West Indies stars, go into the top of the order for them. England are looking at picking Jacob Bethel, a white ball like Finham, who's never made a first class or ODI 100.
Struggling now for the rest of the summer. We're recording this and Ollie Pope's 100 not out.
But they're looking at him.
Your point.
But they're looking at him, right? They're looking at guys who can come in and score runs quickly, take the game away from the opposition.
Totally.
And so if Australia go down that road, Josh Inglis is at the forefront, or should be at the forefront of their thought processes, because he can do that. He's an established white ball player with a tremendous record. He is a very, very good batter in all formats. And look, I haven't seen him bat at number 3. I don't know if he's got the technique to do the job. That's up to kind of Australia's selectors to assert that whether or not he does. But he's got the right mentality for me. And you're right, Stuart. If he performs well in this West Indies series, particularly if he bats at 3 and Cameron Green slides down to 4, there's a spot there.
It does feel like 3 is open now with Marnus.
I think all 3 of those top 3 spots are what the selectors think that they're wide open. I think the selectors feel that number 3 is wide open. I think that the fans feel that Khawaja's spot might be a little bit more wide open than the selectors do. And we've chopped and changed that other opening spot with Konstas, McSweeney, Marnus, Smith, etc., so much that
Smith opened. Now I remember, yeah.
So all of those guys. So there's this revolving door. Is it going to close now with Sam Konstas? I hope so, but we don't really know.
You have to give. I mean, I would. For him, I will be very disappointed if now. I mean, he's got to get these 3 tests. You would. I mean, he has to. You can't.
Oh yeah, he's got to play in these 3 tests.
He's got to play all 3 now.
I think he's got to play the Ashes as well. I think he's got to play the next 10 or 15 tests for Australia before we really know what his future is going to be. If it's going to be as good as we think it could be, right?
I mean, if it's a disaster, obviously you can't pick him. But if he's getting under 10 every single score, you can't pick him for 15 tests. But
I think we should. I think we should, because what are we losing by doing that? We're going to give the kid 15 test matches to figure out if this potentially generational talent is in fact the generational talent. I mean, Steve Waugh took 28 innings before he got his first Test 100, and he went on to get 30 odd of them. So, it's not written that you're going to get hundreds first coming into Test cricket, particularly as a 19-year-old. People are going to find you out. You're going to make mistakes. You're going to play rash shots. You're going to hit one to cover. You're going to get yourself out occasionally. Let's hope that he does more having the opposition get him out than he does getting himself out. But I just really like the way that he's talked about how much he's learned since he first came onto the scene in Test cricket. It would be very easy to just say, I'm on the journey. He's actually said, I have learned so much since I made my debut in Test cricket about what it means to be a batter and about my own game and all those kinds of things. So it feels to me like he's got this thirst for knowledge, this desire to improve. And reading between the lines, I think that maybe he not regrets, but has learned a lot from the way he approached his attitude to Test cricket in those first couple of Test matches, taking on Bumrah, taking on Kohli, taking on the Indian team, not just with the blade, but generally kind of with his attitude and his talk and all that kind of stuff. So if he's learned from that and dialed that back a bit and found the right balance, actually that probably makes him another step in the right direction as being a quality Test cricketer.
Is there anyone else you want to talk about before we kind of move into the bowling stuff?
Do we want to talk about, if not them, then who? Because there are a host of players that played in the Sheffield Shield this season and made reasonable returns that could be, considering themselves for Australian honours going forward. And do we want to have a look at what those could be?
You tell me. I did have a brief look at the Sheffield Shield because I had that similar sort of thought. And most of the names that I saw that were at top of that list, Jake Weatherald, Hilton Cartwright, Jake Lehman, Curtis Patterson, who, I remembered averages 144 in Test cricket. They are all over 30. They all had great seasons in Sheffield Shield.
Yep.
And look, you look at the New Zealand batting lineup, you look at a lot of batting lineups around the world, over 30 does not anywhere near mean that you're done. But in terms of, looking to the future, they are all over 30 and have first-class averages, generally in 35 sort of range, which is not, knocking down doors, even though, I don't think we're at the era anymore in Sheffield Shield where we've got 15 guys averaging 50 like it seemed back in the 90s.
Certainly not from a career perspective, right? So all the guys that we're going to talk about on this long list of players, none of them, as far as I am aware, average over 40 in their careers in Sheffield Shield cricket. But a lot of them have had good seasons this last season. So you mentioned Jake Weatherald has moved from South Australia to Tasmania. He's still only 29. He scored 906 runs at 50 with 300s in that last Sheffield Shield season. I think he's probably the form guy to be able to come into that Australian team. He's probably the most ready to come into that Australian team if Usman Khawaja wasn't going to be the Australian guy going forward. But the other guys that you spoke about Hilton Cartwright, Lehman, Patterson. Patterson could bat in the top three, but isn't an opener. All the rest of those guys are middle order players at the top. There's also lots of guys, and we will throw Peter Hanscom into that mix, 34, ready to come back into the Australian team if he's selected. I think he's, done a real.
That's going to happen, but
doesn't seem, but he's also ready, right? Marcus Harris, we've seen what he can do at Test level. I've come around on Marcus Harris in the last 6 months, to be honest with you. If you asked me 12 months ago, would I want Australian cricket to pick Marcus Harris again? I would have said no. But weight of domestic runs has kind of changed my mind a little bit. And do we need a guy who's steady at the top of the order like that as a foil for Konstas? Maybe that's not a bad option. But I think they're keeping the seat warm for some of these young players who I'm hoping in the next couple of years will make a step up. So I'm looking at the likes of Tim Ward for Tasmania, average 50 this Sheffield Shield season, is only 26. Obviously, Konstas is 29. Ollie Davies for New South Wales is 23, only averaged 27 for this season, but is a prodigious talent with the bat. And then you're looking at guys like, Jason Sanger's made the move, from New South Wales to South Australia. He averaged 38 this season, but scored a bunch of runs. Actually, no, he might have done better than that. No, he did. So he got 704 runs at 78, but still doesn't average 40 in first-class cricket. So he had a good year for South Australia. There's lots and lots of options there for Australia in that sort of 28 to 30 bracket that average somewhere between 35 and 40. There's lots of those kind of guys. But we're really looking at, can Cooper Connolly step up. He averaged 53 this Shield season, didn't make 100. I don't think he's made a first-class 100 yet, but he has played a test match. Teague Wiley for Western.
Batting at 8 or whatever it was.
Yeah. Teague Wiley, he potentially is a top-order batter, Cooper Connolly. Yep. Teague Wiley's a top-order batter, very talented player for Western Australia, only averages 21. And the guy that I had my kind of hopes pinned on a little bit, Ashley Chandrasinghe from Victoria, hasn't really kicked on, only averages 23, 24 in first-class cricket. So there's lots of names there, but there's no Jacob Bethel. There's no Harry Brook, other than Sam Konstas really banging the door down and saying, look, Australia, watch out Steve Smith, watch out Travis Head. I'm the 23-year-old. I'm here. I'm ready to play Test cricket. Other than those guys that we've talked about, I think they're all 2 years away. And hopefully they're 2 years away, not 2 years away from being 2 years away, which can be the case with a lot of young players.
Yeah, and look, outside of Khawaja, you're probably looking at that Australian batting lineup now going, actually, they're all in their, they're all perfect ages. Konstas is probably 2 years too early, but, Green isn't, Green is young, Inglis is still young enough. Head is, they're not like 35, pushing 35 kind of.
Smith's going on a little bit, but the guys who are in the West Indies, I would definitely agree with you.
Yeah, so they're sort of all, you would hope, in kind of the prime of their careers for the next couple of years to maybe bring on some of those guys. Switching over to the bowlers is probably where that question starts to raise its head again, because I think coming out of that World Test Championship, we all sort of went, but Australia will be fine for this next cycle because no matter what happens, they've got that incredible bowling attack that, of Stark, Cummins, Hazelwood, Boland sitting in there and waiting in the wings, and Nathan Lyon. But all of them are in, the mid to late 30s. Cummins is the youngest at 32, I think he is. The rest of them are 35, even Boland's 36. So what do Australia do? Because do you think that all of those guys can get through this whole next World Test Championship cycle? Do they have to start thinking, should we kind of give guys like Sean Abbott an opportunity? Do they just go, we've got this 3 tests and then we don't play another test again till the home summer and we just deal with that then?
I don't think Australia will make any changes to their bowlers. I think their bowlers have been quite clear that if they're fit, they want to play, all of them. And I think at the moment, at least for now, they should. They are, if not the best quartet of Australian bowlers we've ever had. Certainly they've got the most wickets of any quartet of Australian bowlers we've ever had. And I think they've earned the right to say, you know what, we're fit. And if we're ready to play, then we should play. We don't want to be rested or rotated. And I don't necessarily have a problem with that, to be honest with you. I think a lot of people would say, well, what if we, blood a young player, bring them in? But I think opportunities will naturally present themselves for that to happen over the course of a summer. I don't want it to, touch wood, it doesn't happen. But if it did, then there are players that are waiting in the wings to take those opportunities. I think Australia has an underrated set of depth from a bowling perspective. You don't necessarily see that in terms of players bursting onto the ODI scene, although you have seen Xavier Bartlett, you have seen Spencer Johnson, we have seen a little bit of Lance Morris. We've not seen a lot of Jai Richardson, but he's certainly got the skill set if he can stay fit. But so those guys are waiting behind the wings of even a Sean Abbott or a Scott Boland. We're not even talking about guys like Michael Neser anymore, who's had a terrific first-class career and did a really good job when he was picked to play Test cricket.
Yeah, unlucky not to have played more Tests, really.
Really, really unlucky to have not played a lot of Test matches because of the consistency of these other guys. And then you've got a guy like Brendan Doggett who's come in and it seems to be now the next cab off the rank. So there's quite a few guys in the mix there for Australia, again, in that sort of 26 to 28 range, who seem like they would be capable of filling in the role of a third seamer. And I think that's what Australia will be looking at is, can we have 2 of the 4 guys that we currently have go through the entirety of this World Test Championship cycle together? Because if we can do that, we can bring one guy in, potentially. We can bring a couple of guys in if it's from a squad perspective. You've seen England now have kind of started to build a squad of fast bowlers to replace Anderson and Broad, because I think it's more of a horses for courses approach for them, particularly at home. but I think they're thinking, okay, well, we need a bit of depth here because, one, we might need to rest and rotate a little bit more than Australia do, and they might not yet know who the best guys are to lead their attack. I think Australia know that.
They seem to do it in a way of a depth chart kind of situation. Like this guy, sort of like what Daren Sammy was saying, this guy fills this role.
Yes.
So if this person is not available, we're not just going to pick the fourth best seamer. We're going to pick the one that fills this role.
Absolutely. And you see that with the way that they position Archer, Wood, who's the other quick that they've got, the out and out quick.
Well, there's Tongue's been selected.
Tongue's but of the guys who can bowl sort of 145 plus, the Ollie Stones. Ollie Stone's the other one. Australia don't really have that kind of pecking order, but they do have that cattle waiting for them. We do have some young guys that are coming through, I think, in the fast bowling stocks as well, that are capable of stepping up, and I like to see where they are in 2 years. Fergus O'Neill's done a really good job. I think he's only 23 off the top of my head. Will Sutherland's about the same age, more of an all-rounder than an out-and-out strike bowler. And the other one that comes to mind is Jordan Buckingham as well. Okay. So there are options for Australia going forward if we decide that we need to change direction. But I would be looking at that current crop of the existing kind of 4 seamers and going, can we have 2 of those carry us through to the end of this World Test Championship cycle? And then we start building around a more senior Pat Cummins towards the end of that career and hope that, a Spencer Johnson, a Lance Morris, someone with raw pace can come through and fill that role for Australia alongside maybe a third seaming option like Buckingham or Fergus O'Neill, someone like that.
Jai Richardson's the one I would just love to see him get. I was staggered when I looked at his, and he's only 28. It just feels like he's been around for ages, but he just can't get himself fit, can he? I mean, he hasn't been able to do it. So, yeah, look, as you say, there's, when I looked through, all the guys that you've mentioned are in that kind of range of we're moving into, maybe when these next guys go, if it's Richardson 28, Lance Morris 27, Riley Meredith 29, Xavier Bartlett 26, even Todd Murphy thinking about, for
he's mid-20s now, isn't he? Yeah,
he's 24, 25. So moving into Lyons replacement, it does feel like maybe that group and whoever else comes through, Abbott, Doggett. Well,
Abbott's 33, I think 32, 33. Yeah. I mean, you've also got Corey Riccioli from a spin perspective. There are a couple of nice young spinners coming through. Hopefully Tanveer Sangha comes of age as well. He's 21, 22 now, young leggy, sort of learning his trade. So there's lots to like from an Australian perspective, but there's a big drop-off from those current guys down to...
all-time greats.
Down to the guys coming in, and it will be a real transition period for Australia, and there'll be a reset of expectations in terms of consistency of performance and in terms of the level of play that we can deliver on the field, at least for a couple of years. I'm thinking, almost post-Ponting retirement, that kind of Mickey Arthur coach era where we had a lot of players, sort of good test cricketers, but we weren't a great test cricket side as a whole.
You mentioned expectations. We've jumped a bit ahead, I suppose, in terms of our timeline, but expectations for this tour and then maybe even the World Test Championship as a whole?
I don't think we should underrate the West Indies. I mean, Australia underrated the West Indies at the Gabba and we got pounced on. They produced a fantastic performance. It was a brilliant, brilliant individual performance from Shamar Joseph for sure. But as a team, that team beat Australia. It wasn't just one guy that beat Australia. That team showed up and beat Australia. So I don't think Australia should underestimate, and as fans, we shouldn't underestimate how big a challenge the West Indies can be if they play good cricket. I still expect Australia to win. I was very disappointed when Australia lost the World Test Championship final. I thought we played well below our best, but we were still in that game. On every day of that test match, I thought we played well below our best, particularly in terms of taking opportunities, but just general play and how we performed. And we were still in that game up until the Markram-Bavuma partnership, really. That's what took it away from Australia.
Like I said, they take that catch.
Look, I'd love to live in that alternate reality, but we don't. And look, I don't want to harp on it too much, but actually seeing how much it meant to South Africa, I'm really glad that they won it.
That was a cool moment.
To be honest with you. I expect Australia to win at least 2-1 in the West Indies. Ideally, we win 3-0 and we prove that we can still be a clinical test cricket team. But in order to do that, we're going to have to score runs consistently. And based on the evidence of what we've seen from Australia over the last 12 to 18 months, I don't see that consistency there now. There's lots of talent, but they're going to have to all, and I hate using the ESPN phrase, but that top three is going to have to step up and deliver some consistency at the top of the order, because if they don't, I can see the West Indies winning at least one of those test matches.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? I mean, you still think that, I mean, it's hard for me to look at that and think, when I look back at some of the West Indies results, yeah, they haven't won a test series there for a while. I think going back to that England series in 2022, I looked at it before. They drew 1-1 with Bangladesh earlier in 2024. They lost to South Africa, lost to India. And then they beat Bangladesh and beat England in 2022. But obviously that's a long time ago. Lots of different turnover since then. So it's hard to think that, as much as I agree with you that Australia they've got some proving to do in terms of that batting lineup. I think we looked at them and went, they'll be fine. They'll get enough to kind of win against South Africa, because we thought the South African batting lineup was even more fragile. And you look at West Indies and you kind of go, okay, well, where are their runs coming from as well? But yeah, Australia's going to have to prove it. They're at the point now where they have to go out there and do a good job here, because yeah, you lose this series. I mean, if they went there and lost this series, I think that would be a big wake-up call for Australia.
I think the knives would be out for a bunch of batters in particular if they lost that series. The bowlers have got not enough runs on the board, but they've got enough wickets on the board that they would survive if Australia got beaten 2-1 in the West Indies. The batters would not survive that examination, I don't think. And I think if you look at the way the West Indies win that series, you have a look at their senior guys stepping up and making big contributions with the bat. Shai Hope would have to have a really, really big season, a really big series. They'd have to have guys step up around them. And then their bowlers would have to run through Australia. And actually, you can kind of see Seales, Joseph and Joseph running through that Australian batting lineup at least once out of the 6 innings. At least
friendly
once.
Wickets, it could easily happen.
So that could easily happen. And as we said, the lower the scores, the more I think those two batting lineups come together from a gap perspective. And I think the closer the bowling lineups get, I think if it's a really, really good batting wicket, Stark, Cummins, Hazelwood have probably got more mental skills and physical skills to be able to wrangle out the West Indian batting lineup. But if it's if the ball's dominating the bat, then West Indies are just as capable of rolling Australia as we are, or vice versa. So beware the West Indies, I say. And I'm not going to take away from the confidence that I think we should be instilling in this Australian team, but they've got lots of questions in their top three to answer.
Yeah, and look, it's an important series for them, because I know this is the first series of the World Test Championship, but I did a bit of a dive on the fixture list, and they've got some big series at home in terms of the Ashes. They've got 4 tests against New Zealand, which unfortunately always seems to end in a pounding for New Zealand, but it'll be a series that we go into with hope probably at that point and excitement.
But that's not this year, that's next year,
That's
right?
next year.
Who knows what this Australian team will look like in 18 months' time?
Yeah, exactly. But their away series in this cycle, they play the West Indies, but then they go to India and South Africa, which I think on form at the moment, they're going to be pretty tough series.
They will be very tough series for Australia. I think we have to not reset expectations on Australia's ability to win this next World Test Championship or make the final. I think Australia will be hard up against it if they have to beat India in India and have to beat South Africa in South Africa to make this World Test Championship final. You give me your view. Who do you think are the teams that are well placed, having had a look at the schedule here, well placed in this World Test Championship cycle?
It's funny. I mean, you look through any of the lists, and the top sides that have been the top sides for a while sort of stand out as the ones that, because when you look through, you think, oh, well, they'll be favourites in that series, they'll be favourites in that series. And, India's got Australia, West Indies, South Africa at home. You would expect that they would go into all three of those series as favourites.
I think so.
Then they go to Sri Lanka away, New Zealand away, England away. Again, we're going to see what happens in this England series. It's, happening right now. They've made a solid start. Then they've got, then again, New Zealand, Sri Lanka. I would say India will be favourites when they go to Sri Lanka.
Mm-hmm.
Who knows what New Zealand's side will look like this time. I think they come this time, or not this time. They come in our home summer next year.
Mm-hmm.
So, 18 months' time. This is Indian team. They've picked a few younger players now. If those guys are all established players by then that Indian side could be looking pretty formidable by the time. So that, they're obviously strong. I think if you're actually analysing the fixture list, and I feel ridiculous for saying this, I think Pakistan's got the best draw. If I could actually trust in any slight way that their test side could, or any format side could get themselves together, you look at what they have to deal with. At home, they've got New Zealand, South Africa, Sri Lanka. If they're going to be playing if they're going to be putting pitches together like they did against England and back themselves in that environment, that's going to be a pretty tough ask for New Zealand and South Africa.
Mm-hmm.
Sri Lanka, who knows, they've got good spinners of their own. They could do something similar and challenge. But then they go to England, which will probably be pretty tough.
That'll be tough.
But then they go to West Indies and Bangladesh. So there's other 2 away series. So you would think, again, Pakistan, if Pakistan could get themselves together, they could go into those series thinking realistically we can go to an away series where it's probably 2 tests.
Yep.
Both of those are 2 tests. Either 1-1 or you win both of them, and suddenly, you're catapulting yourself into a good position. So I'm not going to sit here predicting that Pakistan is going to win the World Test Championship, but if we're looking for a New Zealand, a South Africa kind of storyline,
their draw is favourable. Look, not to be arrogant, but they don't play Australia and they don't play India in this cycle.
Yeah.
So that's, to me, not playing India is a boost, because I think India, India look like the strongest side. India look like the strongest side, I think. I really like England in this World Test Championship cycle. Let's see what sort of performance they put on against India at the moment in this Test series. I think that will be an important bellwether series.
This first year is going to be big for them.
It's going to be
playing
huge.
India at home and then going to Australia to play the Ashes.
They're tough series, right? And I think what hurts England a little bit, not that one is they play a lot of Test cricket, so it's hard to establish a good percentage if you're 3-2 in a series as opposed to 2-1. That's a very it's a 6% swing, in terms of percentages. Just that one extra.
You can't just go and win a series 2-0 and suddenly get maximum points.
So I think that's a challenge for England. But I like England in this World Test Championship cycle. I like India in this World Test Championship cycle. Not to be disrespectful or unkind to the South Africans, but I think they have a tough away draw in this World Test Championship cycle. I think it's going to be a real challenge for them, as good as their spinners are, to go to all 3 of those Asian countries and win Test matches away. I think that's a really tough ask.
Yeah.
I think they've got a really good home draw. I think that's a fantastic home
Australia,
draw for
England,
them.
Bangladesh. Yep.
That's a really good home draw for them. We'll see what they are as a home side against England. We'll see what they are as a home side against Australia. I expect them to play very, very well. But I think it's going to be tough for them to go to Asia and win. And look, if they become from the hunters to the hunted and can go to Asia and win, that is a huge feather in their cap. So I expect South Africa to be there or thereabouts, but I think that's going to be tough for them from a draw perspective. And look, you have a look at New Zealand. It's going to be tough to go to Australia, England, and Pakistan and win Test matches away. And I think that's going to be, as good as they are, I think that's going to be tough for them as well. So, look, things can fall the right way. We've seen it happen twice now out of 3 times of asking. Things fall the right way for our team to make the final and win it.
Yeah.
So, there are opportunities for teams like Pakistan if they can put together a run.
It feels silly. It honestly feels silly to sit here.
Honestly, but if you talk about alternate universes, if you lived in an alternate universe where you said that Pakistan made the World Test Championship final on the back of going 2-0 New Zealand, 2-0 West Indies, 2-0 Pakistan, drawing against India, beating South Africa 2-1 and beating Bangladesh 3-0.
Yeah.
Like that's a universe that you could live in if they had some consistency with their selection and the way they produce wickets at home, all of those things coming together. So I can see that happening. It's what? 3 out of 10, maybe 2.5 out of 10 that might happen if you wanted to put odds on it. I don't know what they are with the bookmakers, but you can see a world where that happens. You can equally see a world where they finish 5th.
Yeah. That's about all I've got. for tonight. Anything else you want to add for this episode?
Oh, look, it's birthday test series for me. Birthday next week,
Oh,
right around the time of the West Indies test series starting. So
What's your birthday wish? What the one thing that you could hope for from this first test?
Runs from Sam Konstas,
Oof.
I think, to answer the question of what is he going to be like as a test cricketer. I just want to know the answer to that, and that's going to take years to figure out. But I think
it might take a few failures in this test arena to go back to first class cricket for a couple of years and then come back.
We've seen that happen with great Australian opening batters. We've seen it happen with Hayden. We've seen it happen with Khawaja. I don't think it really ever happened with Warner, but we've seen it a lot. I think if Sam Konstas isn't the answer, then the answer is that Australia are going to have quite a lot of pain at the top of the order going forward, at least for the next 12 to 18 months. So let's hope that for Australian cricket fans, and I know there are many, but I know there are many that aren't Australian cricket fans as well. I think he's good for Test cricket generally. I think he puts bums on seats. I think he's the kind of guy that you'd want to have in your cricket team, and that if you're the opposition, you can't wait to get stuck into, because you know that everyone's going to be fired up for it. So I think he's generally a good thing for Test cricket, and let's see what he can do against the West Indies.
Absolutely. Anyone listening and watching it at home, definitely, if you've got a sense of the West Indies that we maybe haven't touched on, definitely throw that in the comments, because so some of these players are just new to us, and we're not going to sit here and pretend that they aren't. So we'd love your predictions in the comments. But thanks very much for joining us tonight. We'll be back later on in the week to look at that first test between England and India. We're sort of a lot of ducks to get in a row this next few weeks, with tests kind of flying all around and different time zones that we're now working with. So we can't give you exact dates or sort of exactly who's going to be on every single episode, but we'll be looking to cover as much as we can over the next sort of 6 weeks of Test cricket, which is fantastic. So hope you all stick with us, and we'll see you all very soon.